Have you ever been on the water watching some fish rise while caddis buzzed everywhere? And have you ever thrown cast after cast with your elk-hair caddis only to have fish refuse it on every single drift? Yeah, I've been there too. In fact, last week I had a night on the river exactly like that. But after a lot of rejection, I stopped to watch and wait, and I observed something that hasn't always been crystal clear. Trout are moving a lot during a caddis hatch, and they're suspended much higher in the water column than we generally assume. So today on Untangled, I'm going to share the story that completely changed how I fish caddis flies. You're going to learn from my mistakes so that hopefully you don't spend the better part of 20 years fishing them the wrong way too. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. I had a little adventure last week. I had this night out on the water. I was on the road traveling, getting some work done. Had a couple hours to pull over and fish this little stream. And this 2 or 3 hour session, however long I fished, I can't even remember, but this little session on the water completely changed how I fish caddis flies. It made me realize everything I've been doing wrong when I get into a caddis hatch for basically my entire life. But really, it didn't just... I think the best way to describe it is it crystallized for me the difference between learning something from a book or a podcast or video or whatever, and then knowing it in a way that you can confidently apply and use that knowledge out in the real world. Because I've read, I've talked about on here, I've learned that caddis flies, they don't just sit still on the water. The adults, they like to move around. They're skittering a lot. They don't really spend a lot of time actually on the water surface either. They're very different from mayflies or even midges that do spend substantial time on the water surface. And yes, there is value in skittering them and trying to give them some movement. And you can learn all that. You can hear about it. But then you get out in the water and you remember all the lessons that you hear about. You got to get a natural presentation. It's got to be a drag-free drift. You got to make it look as real as possible. And that drag-free drift works often enough that even though there's that thought in the back of your mind saying, oh, well, try skittering that caddis, see if that'll work. The drag-free drift works often enough that sometimes it's hard to go against what you do with everything else and fish something a different, unique way. And that was the case for me where, yeah, I could understand that I probably should do this with caddis. I've watched other people do it with caddis and have success, but I didn't want to take the chance to do it for myself. And that's what this night really crystallized for me was, no, you got to take that chance. You got to do it. Actually put this stuff that you're learning and put it out into practice and actually try and use it. So that's really the big takeaway for me was crystallizing that difference. Okay. Now, let's get into the story, tell you guys what happened, and we're going to start with the bugs themselves because they are the star of what we're doing. So caddis flies they're one of the most prevalent aquatic insects in the entire world. They're in almost every trout stream on the planet. You can read in books and magazines and whatnot that in some places they make up, as much as 50% of a trout's diet. I even read somewhere that they make up to, like the caddis pupa themselves make up to 70% of a fish's diet at some points in the year. So trout love to eat caddis flies. They are around, they're every bit as important as mayflies, but I don't think they get quite the same attention from anglers because the mayflies, sit on the water longer. The mayflies maybe look a little bit more elegant. We really romanticize the mayfly hatches, and the caddis flies, it's almost like we kind of take them for granted and we just don't talk about them as much for whatever reason. I'm not sure why that is, but they're extremely important and they need to be talked about, need to be discussed because they matter every bit as much as your mayfly does. And from late spring through early fall, caddis are active, so they're on the menu for a good chunk of the year. And then on top of that, they've also got a pretty unique life cycle because like every other aquatic insect, they start out as an egg on the bottom of the river, and then they're going to hatch into their larval stage. And at this point, they will live as a few different things. They can either live as a cased caddis, which if you've ever turned over a rock or a branch in the river and you've seen these they look like little rock cases that are stuck together or whatever, that's a caddis case, and they make them to protect themselves while they're growing. Other caddis will spin these little nets and webs underwater to catch food, and they'll hang out there like an underwater spider almost. And then other ones will just swim freely while they grow in this larval stage. And then after that larval stage, once they're ready to become adults, they enter the pupal stage. And this is where they really start to get interesting, because this is where they're ready to emerge and turn into an adult. They're ready to leave mom's basement and move into grandma's basement, because nothing says independence like, I don't live at my mom's house anymore. I live at grandma's, right? That's an independent life right there. So they're ready to be an adult. They're starting to move up to the surface where they're going to hatch and turn into adults. And trout love caddis pupa. That's one of their favorite things to eat because they're really vulnerable. They can't escape the way an adult can, because during, when they're adults, when they're on the water, drying their wings off before they fly away or coming back to lay their eggs, the caddis flies, they're kind of bouncing on the water. I mentioned that earlier. There's a lot of movement. They can very easily escape fish when they're on the surface. When they're underwater, the fish still have the advantage. So they can eat those pupa and just gorge on them because they can't really escape them. And trout love them because of that. They know that, hey, this is a food source that it ain't going to just get away from me all that easy. So it's an easy meal for them at that point. And that's why a lot of times during hatches, when you see fish taking adult caddis off the top of the river, the rises tend to be splashier, tend to be louder, make a bigger ruckus, because the fish are really going after those flies, trying to make sure they get them, make sure they snack them down. And this hatch happens most often during the evening or even into the night. So that emergence from the pupa into the adult usually happens in the evening. And then once they're adults, they leave the water completely, leave the river, and they'll go live in streamside vegetation for a while, sometimes like up to a month. That's why if you're walking towards the river, anytime during the summer, you might kick up a whole bunch of caddis and just see them buzzing everywhere. And then you get to the water and there's no bugs buzzing on the water. Well, that's because, the hatch hasn't happened yet, but the ones that have hatched, the night before, maybe 2 weeks before, are in the bushes, just hanging out, growing, getting ready. And then once they're ready to come back and mate and lay their eggs, they'll come back to the river and they'll form these big mating swarms of caddis. And this is where things can get really confusing with caddis, because you can see these mating swarms over the river and you're like, okay, well, did these ones just hatch? Are fish actively snacking on them, or are they coming back to lay their eggs? And the dead giveaway there is if they're laying eggs, you're going to see a lot of them going down and kind of hitting the water really rapidly and then bouncing back up. Then hit the water rapidly and bounce back up, because they're trying to shake the eggs off of the end of their bodies and get those down into the water. So that's your dead giveaway that they're laying eggs versus just they've hatched and they're ready to go back to the streamside vegetation. And if all of this is new to you, this caddis life cycle, a lot to comprehend. I understand it's a lot to keep straight sometimes. So we've actually put everything you need to know about the caddis life cycle, including the flies we recommend to imitate each life cycle stage. That's all in our free field guide. It's this completely waterproof, spiral-bound book. Goes right in your pack. A nice physical thing you can open up. You don't have to look for your downloaded files on your phone. It's got all the information right there, and it's completely free. We want y'all to have this. You just pay the shipping to get it to you, and you can have one of these for yourself. So there's a link to go grab those down in the show notes, or if you're watching the video podcast, there will be a link right here on the screen as well. You can go ahead and grab your field guide. So there's everything we need to know about the caddis generally to understand what was going on. Now let's get into that night I had on the water. So I pull up to the river and, I finished off my Diet Coke. I'm all jazzed up. I'm ready to go. And this is up in an area where I love fishing. I don't get up there as much as I'd like to. And I was really excited. So I get out. There's decent mix of bugs right at the parking area. There's some caddis, there's some mayflies, there's some midges buzzing around. and get the rod out. I didn't tie anything on yet, though, because I wanted to see what the fish were actually eating, because these fish, especially in this stream, they'll be really particular. They'll get keyed in on the one hatch, and that's all they'll eat. They'll ignore other stuff. So I get my rod strung up. I walk down through the river, and I get this pool, and I can see the water's crystal clear. I can see there's these two big cutthroat just going to town, but they weren't really rising. Okay, they were like an inch or two below the surface, and you could clearly see them opening their mouths. You could see them moving side to side, and then every now and then, you would just barely see their nose break the surface while they kind of nosed up to eat something that was right on the surface or just under the surface film. You'd see that. But like 90% of what they were doing was going on subsurface. You could clearly see they were going to town, but they weren't rising. And there were enough caddis on the water while they were doing this. I watched them eat a few of them, that I tied on an elk-hair caddis, and then our half-baked caddis we have here at VFC, which is just this emerger pattern that imitates the pupal stage of the caddis. I tied that on about 15 inches behind the elk-hair caddis. And my first couple of casts, I actually surprised myself, because it usually doesn't happen. I landed my casts where they needed to be. They were on target. They didn't get drag. I was like, oh man, I'm doing good tonight. You know, you have that, you get the first good cast, and you're like, oh, it's going to be a good night. And the big cutthroat, they rose, they looked at him, and they rejected him both times. I'm like, what's going on? These casts are great. Come on. So I made a few more casts to make sure I wasn't getting any drag. I'm paying super close attention. I don't see any drag. I don't see any reason they should be refusing these flies. So I decided at that point, okay, the presentation's as good as I can make it, because this pool, there was really only one spot that I could stand and cast to and get a drift. So I couldn't move. I couldn't change where I was and get the drift I needed to based on where the fish were. So I just had to, there was the one spot. There was no drag on them, so I decided it is time to re-rig. And this time, I just tied a sparkle gun on, because there were still mayflies on the water, and I thought, well, maybe the fish will eat this one. And again, they looked at it, but they didn't eat it. They just looked at it and were like, yeah, nice try, Durant. And it's not the right fly. When are you going to figure it out? So I was like, okay, fish, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to watch and wait for a minute, because clearly I'm doing something wrong, and I don't know what it is. And this is something I've had to force myself to do more and more of over the years, is doesn't work out, stop and watch. Don't just continue casting and putting flies over the fish. That'll put them down more often than not. You get rejected a couple of times, just stop, watch, and wait. This is the best thing you can do. And again, I'm watching the fish, and they're suspended just below the surface. Okay. And a few more fish had even moved out into feeding lanes lower in the pool. And most of the fish that I could see were in the top third of the water column. They were all looking up. They're all actively feeding, but they were very rarely breaking the surface. And with the amount of caddis that were on the water, I didn't see any that looked like they were coming back to lay their eggs. I didn't see any, making that classic dropping egg movement. So I assumed, all right, they've got to be actually eating caddis. Caddis have to be emerging. There's a hatch going on right now. They've got to be eating caddis pupa as they're emerging, but they refused my caddis emerger. Well, maybe it was the wrong size, maybe it was the wrong color, whatever, but I was completely out of any other caddis emergers. I didn't have anything else with me. I'm perilously low on flies. I haven't tied in like a month. So I was kind of up a creek without a paddle at this point. And then to add insult to injury, okay, as I'm sitting here watching and waiting, the biggest fish, he was probably an 18-inch cutthroat, is at the head of the pool. He ate like 3 emergers in a row, and then he just eats an adult right off the surface, which was only the 3rd or 4th actual adult caddis that I'd seen eaten all night. So I'm really frustrated, but watching that caddis come up, or watching that fish come up to the caddis, that's when it really clicked for me, because that caddis was moving around like a 2-year-old all hopped up on Mountain Dew, man. It was just spazzing out on top of the water. It was clearly trying to dry its wings and fly away before it could get eaten. And sadly, it didn't make it. And that's when it clicked for me. It was like a switch flipped. And I'd spent all night trying to get this perfect dead drift, not just with my dry fly, but with my emerger as well. And it hadn't worked. The fish, They'd come and look at it, but they could tell something wasn't right with it. And then again, on top of that, I could see that the fish are holding up a lot higher in the water column than I thought. So my dropper was way too long. So yeah, the first fish in the pool was seeing my my emerger, but the rest probably weren't because it had sunk down below them by that point. And I really want to highlight, I really want to highlight this part of the night because it's something we hear a lot about, but I don't think we always understand it. Because, generally fish are holding in that bottom third of the water column. That's where they spend a lot of their time because the water runs the slowest down there. So they expend the least energy, but there's a lot of foods they can eat. That's just where they want to hang out. But when a hatch starts, that's when they're actually going to start moving, looking up because there's enough food. They're going to follow the food and there's enough food higher in the water column that the expense of the extra energy fighting the faster current up there becomes worth it to them because they're eating more calories than they're burning. So they're going to go and they're going to look up top. And I think it's rare for us to actually be able to see those fish suspended up in that middle ground, not right below the surface, not in that bottom third, but right in that top third of the water column, which is what I was seeing a lot of that night. Because we know fish occupy that space. They have to, because as insects emerge into adults, that's a great spot to ambush them as they're rising to the surface. We know fish have to hang out there, but actually seeing it in crystal clear water, you'll crystallize, pardon the pun, crystallize that for me. Because it made me realize when I'm fishing my dry droppers during hatches, just about any hatch, I'm probably almost always fishing that dropper way too deep. I'm probably getting way past where a lot of those fish that are suspended are actually ever going to see that dropper. Okay. And that really just made me realize, oh yeah, I'm doing this all wrong. So I'm in that pool. I didn't want to re-rig entirely because it was just one spot, and a longer dropper would be better when I got into faster water because I wanted to be able to, kind of let it get to all parts of the water column and see where they were in the riffles. Are they going to hold as high in the riffle as they are in the pool? I don't know. In the pool, that higher, the water's still not moving as fast as it is in a riffle. So maybe they'll be a little bit lower. I wasn't sure on that. So I wanted to keep the dropper length where it was just so I could suss out where they were in the riffles. So I decided to keep the half-baked caddis on as my second fly. I didn't change it. But what I did was I actually put a size 16 Frenchie on right underneath that, about 12 inches down or so. And this is where it gets really interesting because that half-baked caddis has an elk-hair wing, and the Frenchie that I tied on was pretty small. And that half-baked caddis, that floats pretty high in the water column anyways. Initially, it will start out at about 4 to 6 inches below the surface, and then as the drift progresses, it'll just keep dropping and dropping. But what happened with this setup is the half-baked kind of suspended the Frenchie a little bit more because of that elk-hair wing, and the Frenchie wasn't so heavy that it just dragged the half-baked caddis down immediately. So my first cast through this pool, I can see my flies, and the Frenchie, because it's being suspended a little bit, was actually at like the perfect depth. The half-baked was still probably a little too high, but that Frenchie was right at the perfect depth. And I get that right in front of a fish, and they didn't care. I don't know why he didn't care. It was kind of frustrating. So then I throw my next cast, and my next cast was bad, and my line didn't land where I wanted, and my whole rig starts dragging immediately as soon as it starts drifting. And that little bit of extra movement, I watched my flies do the same thing, same depth. They were right where they needed to be. And that movement triggered the fish. I started catching fish. As soon as we got movement on them, they were at the right depth. I watched them pass in front of fish, nothing with a dead drift. As soon as we got movement, as soon as there was a little bit of a swing, boom, the fish went nuts and I couldn't keep them off. The rest of the night was just a repeat of that, where I was able to suspend that Frenchie basically because of the half-bake holding it up a little bit higher. I was able to suspend that Frenchie right where a lot of the fish were. And whether it was a riffle, a pool, anything, that little swinging motion throughout the night. I would throw it up there and I'd kind of land my cast so that they would swing a bit. And the fish were, for lack of a better term, they were throwing themselves at my fly. And I was catching tons on the swing, really because I was doing the last part of our motto here at Untangled, right? I was putting flies in front of fish, but now I was making those flies look real. Now, before this night, I'd tried to skitter adult caddis flies before. It had worked fairly well for me, but I'd never focused on swinging and skittering my entire rig before. Okay, with the exception of when I was fishing soft tackles or wet flies, which you do want to swing those completely. But I usually don't only fish those flies. I like being able to have the dry fly eat. I love being able to see that. It just, that does it for me, right? It's what I really enjoy. So that secret sauce of swinging all of my flies, of getting movement on all of them, that's what turned what probably would have been like a 1 or 2 fish night into a night where I legitimately lost track of how many of these that I caught. And my big mistake all these years was going too deep and then staying at a dead drift with everything and not giving these caddis flies some movement, because again, they're moving. And the fish moving so much to eat the flies tells me, yes, they're moving. And I think we overlook, at least I certainly did, how much caddis flies are actually moving and how much movement we need to give to our caddis fly imitations. So I know this is one night, this is one data point on one river, and you might be like, okay, Durant, this is cool, but is this just a one-time thing? Like, it might be, but it was such a dramatic difference in success I had from other nights fishing caddis hatches on this same river to where I think there's got to be something to it. And then again, it clicks for me, right? All the stuff I've heard about swinger caddis flies, give them movement, give them action, that all comes into it too. And it was that lightning bolt moment of, oh, duh, why haven't I been doing this? And it all comes back to, well, the dead drift has worked well enough for me to this point. Why would I mess with something that's been a good enough thing for something that might not work, right? That classic fear of failure that I think a lot of us run into. And there's nothing wrong with that, but at some point you do have to push yourself through it and say, no, I'm going to try this other thing, because what's the worst that happen? I don't catch fish. Oh, darn it. Yeah, we want to catch fish, but the worst thing that happens is you don't catch any. That's not that bad of an outcome. So I would say definitely go try this. If you've done this before, definitely let us know. You can tell the stories in our school group, which is a free group we run. It's like Facebook, but it doesn't suck. No political memes, no HOA comments from Aunt Karen, just fly fishing all the time. There's a link to join school down in the show notes. If you've had experiences with a caddis like this, definitely jump in there and tell us, or leave a comment and tell us. I'd love to hear more from folks like this, but definitely take it from me. Go out and try it and tell us what the experience is like. I'd really love to see what everybody else's experiences and just time on the water have been with caddis flies. I think we could learn a lot from it. So hopefully y'all got something from that part of the show. I appreciate it. But with that, folks, we're going to wrap up the open of this week's episode and jump into the Q&A portion, because every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, there's a link to send those into us down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Bryant from Colorado's got our first question, writes in and says, thank you, VFC guys, for the great content. I have learned a lot from your info. My question is, my nephew has seen my fishing pictures from fly fishing and wants to learn. The kid is a natural angler and has been fishing since he was big enough to hold a pole. He's 12 now and thinks fly fishing looks pretty cool. He has a fly rod and we've practiced casting in the front yard. We even spent a few hours on an easy stretch of river playing with fishing a nymph. Him and his brother thought looking under rocks to see what's there was really cool. What are some things I can do to ensure he has fun fishing like this? The rivers in my area don't see that traditional Colorado pressure, so it's not as challenging to fish out here, but the crazy weather and drought has increased the difficulty fishing out here. Thanks for all you do and any insights. Ryan, this is a really good question. First off, definitely super important to get kids involved. We've seen hunting has taken a huge death spiral in participation across the country. A lot of that has to do with the barrier to entry to hunting. It's extremely expensive to get into hunting in a lot of ways. Fly fishing is not terribly far behind that in a lot of ways, but there are still ways to do it on the cheap. You don't have to put in for tags. It's something you can do more consistently than hunting. But that being said, we don't want to end up where hunting is at the moment with not enough young people filling the ranks. So this is really important stuff to do to ensure that we got folks who are going to continue to love the rivers, take care of the rivers, take care of the places where we find trout, because that's the stuff that really matters at the end of the day, is that these places, these amazing fisheries exist for folks to experience in the years to come. So tip the hat to you for getting them out. Now, actual advice. When I was a guide, I did a few trips with kids who were younger, about that 12 to 14-ish age. And the thing that I always focused on when I was taking any kids out was I wanted to get them into fish quickly. I wanted them to have a very quick reward for the work, because kids got a shorter attention span. There's nothing wrong with that. I've got a short attention span, for crying out loud. You can ask anybody, right? It's hard to keep me engaged for more than 5 minutes. So I focused on a couple of lakes that I knew where the fish were, and that if you got a cast out to them, they were going to cooperate with you without too much effort. And so I'd do that time on the lakes, getting into fish. And then we'd also spend a lot of times on the high country streams with brookies and cutthroat, where the fish are really eager to rise to anything so long as it's presented well. So if you get them to do a halfway decent cast, they'd catch a fish. And again, getting them into fish quickly was just a great way to keep them engaged, especially because I could tell dad, like, hey, go downstream and practice. I'm going to work with the kid. And then dad's getting into fish too. So everybody's happy. And then once we've gotten into fish and the kid is seeing, oh, this works, I can actually catch fish this way, that's when I would pivot and I would ask him, all right, we can keep catching these little guys, or we can go try for some bigger fish. They're going to be tougher, but they're going to be bigger. And 9 times out of 10, the kids always wanted to go for the bigger fish, and that's what dad wanted too. So it worked out really well that way, just tailoring the day to them, getting them the fish right off the bat, kept them engaged the rest of the day, in my experience. So because they'd already succeeded for the day in their minds, right? They'd already gone out and been shown, oh yes, this works. This is something I can do to actually catch fish. That fear of failure is gone. It's like they're almost playing with house money. At that point, they're willing to go try for bigger fish or different fish, or just do something different after they've caught a few. So that is my big advice, is just go wherever you go, whether it's a river or lake, it doesn't matter. Just go somewhere that they can quickly get into fish and get that reward coming through of, oh yes, this is working. I can do this. I know how to fly fish. And then it's really going to keep them engaged. Because I remember being 10 or 11, we'd go up. We had a family cabin for a while at a timeshare, and there was a kid's fishing pond up there. And I remember going up, and I'd fish for 5-10 minutes, not catch anything. And I'd look at my dad and be like, "Where's the fish? Why aren't they here?" And my dad's always, "Oh, you got to be patient. You're not patient enough. You're just like your mother." It's a good thing my mom doesn't listen to this show. So, in fact, I don't think she's ever even seen one of our videos. So I could make mom jokes all the time. Anyways, I get really impatient. I remember that, and I remember feeling like I could never do it. But then on the days when I caught one right off the bat, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I can do this. I caught a couple." So it was just a completely different mindset I had as a kid. And again, my experience guiding kids showed me that was fairly consistent across a lot of kids. The other tip I have too is just don't make an all-day trip out of it either. The guide trips I did where the dads did bring their younger kids, got to about 2 or 3 in the afternoon and the kids were just about tapped out. And I don't blame them. It's a long time to fish. Long days are hard on everybody. So don't plan like a 12-hour sun up to sundown day. Go in the evening when the fishing is going to be the best, or go in the morning if you need to beat the temps, right? And go hit it really hard for a few hours and then go do something else. Go home, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you don't forget the bug spray at home, because that'll be the other thing that ruins the experience, is if you're getting eaten alive by skeeters the whole time. So that's what I would focus on. Just make sure that, and I understand what you're saying with the crazy weather and the drought. That's why I recommend the lakes and stuff. They're faring a little bit better in the drought. The water temps are still probably starting to creep up, especially in lower elevations, but you get up into the high country and you should be in business. So I really appreciate the question, man. Thanks a bunch for sending it in. Connor from Wyoming has our next question, writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer, been really enjoying the show and all the tips you are willing to give out. My question is about headwaters versus tailwaters. Do you fish them differently? Go about them differently? Is one better than the other?" Connor, this is a good question. Hey, let's define some terms for a minute so we all know what we're talking about. Headwaters are generally going to be the higher elevation, little streams and trickles and ditches that all join together to form major rivers. So they are where all the rivers begin. Out here in the West, those tend to be high elevation. Elsewhere in the country, they're not necessarily really high elevation, but since water flows downhill, the headwaters do tend to be higher in elevation. Okay. So the Colorado River, for example, big river, we all know about it. It's got tons of headwaters up in Rocky Mountain National Park in that area of Colorado. And it's just all those tiny little streams. They all join up together and they eventually form the main stem of the Colorado itself. So that's what a headwater is. It's the small beginning streams that end up forming a bigger river. Tailwater is very different. This is the river that flows out of a dam. And tailwaters tend to be a bit bigger and a bit deeper because they're coming out of lakes and reservoirs. And then on top of that, they have a ton of food because a lot of dams draw the water from the bottom of the reservoir. So the water stays pretty cool all year long, which means it's the right temperature for bug life to thrive and fish life to thrive. And with all those bugs, you get a bunch of really big fish, and there's so much food. The fish get very picky. This is where fish get PhDs on telling a fake fly from a real fly. And this is where you see grown men cry and curse and break rods because a 20-inch rainbow's refused their fly for the umpteenth time that day. Not that I've ever been one of those who broke a rod over my knee. But anyways, that's what the tailwater is, okay? Neither is better than the other. And if you've been listening to the show for any length of time, you'll know I really shy away from saying anything's better than anything else. Because it's all so subjective, right? For me, I love dry fly fishing more than any other kind of fly fishing. For me, that's what's better, but that's not always better for you, right? I know we've got a lot of folks who listen to the show who love swinging wet flies and soft tackles, and that's great. I tip my hat to you. I'm glad you guys love something. That doesn't do it for me. Doesn't mean I dislike it or anything. It's just not my favorite way to fish, right? But that's why I'm not going to tell you that one's better than the other. It's really about what kind of experience you want more than anything, and I'll get to that in a minute. But headwaters and tailwaters fish vastly different from each other because headwaters, again, since they're generally higher in elevation and the streams are small, they usually don't support a ton of bug life. There's just not a lot of bug life up there, so the fish are smaller because of that. And then on top of that, especially here in the Rockies, those headwaters are up so high in elevation that they're covered under snow and ice for a good chunk of the year. Those fish might only get 4-ish months a year where the bugs are really active and they can actually grow. So their growing seasons are short. So that limits their size too. But because of this, they're very eager to eat. They will throw themselves at anything so long as it's presented well because the growing season's short. They've got to take advantage of what food comes their way when it does. So they're going to be a lot less discerning about the flies that you throw at them. Whereas on a tailwater, that's where they're going to be really picky because they've got thousands of natural bugs. So when yours comes along, they're going to be able to tell real quick that, oh yeah, that's not real. Because on top of the thousands of natural bugs, the tailwaters, you can fish them year round. So that draws a lot of folks. And then because there's so much food, the fish tend to grow larger in tailwaters. So that draws a lot of folks. So you've got all this pressure. So these fish know right from the get-go almost, it feels like in a lot of places, what a real fly looks like and what a fake fly looks like. So that's the big challenge with the tailwaters is just making sure that your presentations look as perfect as possible and that you're matching the hatch as well as you can. And then again, what it really comes down to as far as which one's better than the other, there's not one that's better than the other. It's just what kind of experience do you want? there's a lot of days when I just want to go up into the high country. I want to be in wild country and probably not see anybody for the rest of the day. And that's what I want. That's what's going to fill my cup for me on that day of fishing. Whereas there'll be other days that I'm like, yeah, I want to go find I want to find a hog. I'm hunting hogs today. I want to find something big. I want to find a fish that looks like it eats like I do, just blubberous and embarrassing and family photos. That's what I'm looking for. So it just really boils down to what kind of experience you want to have. Tailwaters tend to be a bit more crowded, but the opportunity to get into a big fish is very real in a lot of tailwaters. So those are the differences. You couldn't have picked two more different streams to talk about. So that was a really good question on your part to give us some variety to discuss. But hopefully you got something out of that. You got any more follow-ups about these, please let me know. Tyler from Canada has our next question, writes in and says, I've always wondered how anyone can cast out a Rapala in any color and it will catch a fish, but streamer's size, shape, and color matter so much. Tyler, this is a really good question for a lot of reasons. And first off, trout are predators, even though I don't think we necessarily think of them as predators. Because we always talk about how easily spooked they are and how they're easily scared and how you've got to be careful with them. And usually those aren't phrases you associate with predators, but trout are just about top of the food chain in a river or a lake. You've obviously got mink, otters, they're going to eat fish, so they're going to prey on them. But trout are predators in a very real sense in that they're eating crawdads, they're eating mice. They do eat ducks sometimes, ducklings, not full-grown ducks. They'll eat frogs and then all the aquatic insects. So trout are very much a predator. And since they're predators, they're not just omnivorous critters that rummage and eat and browse anything. That's not their nature. Okay, that means because they're predatory, they are going to strike out of aggression quite frequently. So yes, there will be times when they're striking to eat, but a lot of times it's an aggression strike where it's, hey, you're too close to me, get away. And I'm bigger than you, so I'm gonna get you out of here. Or it's just something that triggers that predatory response in them and they just go for it. So a lot of times that's what is going to get triggered in a trout to eat your flies. So when you're fishing with streamers, there is going to be that element of, yes, the fish is chasing and eating the streamer because it looks like a sculpin or a shiner or whatever bait fish you're trying to imitate. But a lot of the times it's just that aggression response. It's triggering that, hey, I'm bigger than you, get out of here, get away from me, I'm going to eat you response that predators have. So when we compare fishing streamers to fishing with Rapalas or any other kind of conventional lure, whatever one we want to throw out there, that's really what the Rapala is trying to do. It's trying to trigger that aggression strike. And yes, there are some that look exactly like little rainbow trout, little brown trout, or perch, or whatever they're colored as, and all the other lures look like other things too. But a lot of the times, you look at panther martins, for crying out loud, they've got that little spinning blade on them. It doesn't look like anything, right? It's just making movement and vibration of the water that's triggering that predatory response. And I'll just say here as well, I've been fishing a lot more conventional gear lately. Just been switching things up. I'm not falling out of favor with fly fishing, don't you worry, but I've been in situations where conventional gear was the thing to fish. And so I've just been able to do it more and more lately. And I think we can really romanticize how effective conventional gear is for fish, because it's not just, oh, pick any lure, throw it out there, and boom, you're getting into fish. It's never that simple. The thing that I think we romanticize with gear fishing is it is so much easier to cover water with lures and spinning rods because the casting's so much easier. Just pick it up, throw it out there. It's much quicker. So covering water and getting stuff in front of fish, a lot easier with that gear than with flies, in my experience. And just, really drive this point home. I was in Florida at the beginning of June. We were supposed to be fishing for tarpon, but we got rained out in the Keys. You just couldn't see the tarpon. You couldn't cast them. It was too windy. So we ended up leaving the Keys and going back to South Florida and fishing some of the canals and whatnot. And we're on one canal, and we were fishing for some of the exotic fish that are in there. And they were just going nuts for this little silver spinner that my buddy Max had. And we were throwing it out, and it really was throw it out, cover water, and they were just going nuts for it. They were loving the heck out of that silver spinner. Well, we fished through that canal. We didn't catch anything huge, so we said, let's go to this different one where the fish are a little bit bigger and see if we can't find something there. So we pull up to this canal, and I'm like, hey, this silver spinner was working. Let's try it. It's the same fish. No, they didn't want it. I had to switch completely. Same fish, maybe an hour and a half apart. Very similar food source, but they just weren't on that for whatever reason. So it really isn't that simple of just pick a lure and throw it out there. Yeah, there's a lot more to conventional fishing as well, but you do get the benefit of you cover tons of water with it. So getting back to the streamer side of it, when we talk about streamer size and shape mattering in terms of how effective you're going to be with them, really the size is about getting that fly down to the right depth and then getting the fish something that they can eat. Streamers, small streamers are going to catch more fish because more fish can eat that smaller streamer. And generally smaller streamers weigh less, so they're going to sink less quickly than heavier streamers. But large streamers, you throw that out, you're probably going to catch fewer fish, but the ones you do catch are almost always going to be bigger because only big fish can really get their mouths around those. So that's really where size comes into play here is what kind of fish are you targeting and where are they? Because that's going to play. That's why you choose a big versus a small streamer. And then as far as colors, that really just kind of comes down to what colors are the fish responding to, what mimics the food source in there, what's going to trigger that predatory response in them. Because again, certain colors are going to trigger more bites than others based on what food's available. You see this a lot in rivers that have a big population of crawdads, where the crawdads change color as they molt their shells throughout the year. And they will respond the fish will respond very differently to ones that match what color the crawdads are now versus ones that don't. So that's going to play into it as well. So really you get down to it, and it is streamer size, shape, and color is way more about getting that streamer where it needs to be and in front of the right fish than it is about like, oh, well, this matters. They're only going to eat it if it's this. No, it's my bigger streamers are going to get to the deeper part of the river where the fish are hanging out right here versus, oh, I'm fishing this shallow pool. I'm going to use this small streamer so it doesn't sink to the bottom immediately. That's where the difference really comes into it. So hopefully that explanation made sense. If you need any other info about streamers and whatnot, please feel free to let us know and drop comments. But that wraps up the Q&A portion of this week's episode. And now we will end like we always do with the Live Real Life moment. We love to hear about the adventures y'all are up to, see the pictures from them. It's what VFC and Untangled are all about. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to share with us, there's a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment comes to us from Colin. I grew up fishing a small creek in my hometown for brook trout. This was the very first place I ever went fishing. Having recently got into fly fishing, I thought I'd go back to the creek for the first time in 15 years. Here's a picture of the first brook trout I caught back in my childhood fishing spot with the fly rod. It may not be a trophy fish, but it's one of my favorite catches ever. Colin, I love it. I love that so much. Yeah, it's a gorgeous fish too. It doesn't matter that it's not a trophy, man. It's the memories behind the fish, right? I mean, I've got pictures of fish and replica mounts of fish that aren't the biggest that I've ever caught, but you keep them because of the story and the memory behind those fish. And getting to go back to where you grew up fishing and do it on the fly, that's really cool. That's a great experience. So thanks a bunch for sharing it. Appreciate it. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you so much for watching and listening all the way to the end of the show. Helps us out more than you can know. If you want to help us out even more, make sure you rate and subscribe to Untangled wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life. That's our goal. We want you guys to go out and have a ton of fun on the water, and we do that if more and more folks are hearing about us. So please make sure you're helping us out that way. And until next week, everybody, get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, and live real life.